There is a moment, and you have lived it, where everything goes quiet in the worst possible way. Someone says something about you. Maybe it's in a room full of people. Maybe it's behind your back, and the words find their way to you like they always do. Maybe it's a colleague who undercuts you in a meeting, or a friend who frames a jab as a joke, or a stranger online who decides your character is something they get to define. And in that moment, something ancient and wired in fires up inside you. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts race. Every instinct you have screams at you to open your mouth, to correct the record, to make them understand that what they said is wrong, that you are not what they described, that the truth is different, that you deserve to be seen clearly. And almost every time, the people who listen to that instinct lose. Not because defending yourself is morally wrong, not because the accusation was right, but because of something far more uncomfortable than either of those things, because the act of defense itself, regardless of how justified it is, shifts the power away from you the moment you engage in it. And smart people figured this out. Not through reading ancient texts, not through studying manipulation tactics, but through experience. Through watching what actually happens in rooms when people get accused of something and react versus when they don't. Through noticing over and over again that the people who came out on top were almost never the ones who argued the hardest for their own innocence. This is not a lesson about being passive. It is not about being a pushover or rolling over when someone attacks you. It is something far more precise than that, and far more powerful. It is about understanding what actually happens at a psychological level when you feel the urge to defend yourself, and choosing, deliberately and strategically, to do something else entirely. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with why the urge to defend yourself feels so overwhelming in the first place. Because if you don't understand the root of it, you'll never be able to override it when it matters. Human beings are fundamentally social animals. That is not a metaphor. That is biology. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors lived in groups where your reputation was literally the difference between survival and death. If the tribe thought you were a thief, you were cast out. If people believed you were a coward, you lost your standing. If your character was successfully attacked and you did nothing to counter it, the damage was real and lasting. So the brain developed a hair-trigger response to reputational threat. The moment someone challenges who you are, your nervous system treats it with nearly the same urgency as a physical threat. Your body floods with stress hormones, your thinking narrows, your emotional brain hijacks the wheel from your rational brain, and you feel compelled, not just inclined but compelled, to fix it right now, immediately before the narrative sets. This response made sense 10,000 years ago in a tribe of 50 people where rumors spread slowly and face-to-face correction actually worked. It makes far less sense today in a world where social dynamics are infinitely more complex, where perception is shaped not by truth but by framing, where the way you respond to an accusation often says more about you than the accusation itself ever did. And it makes no sense at all when you understand what defending yourself actually communicates to the people watching. Here is the brutal truth that most people never fully absorb. When you defend yourself, you are not demonstrating your innocence. You are demonstrating your anxiety about the accusation. And anxiety, to a watching crowd, reads as guilt. It reads as instability. It reads as someone who needs external validation to feel okay about who they are. The person watching you scramble to explain yourself does not think, oh, they must be innocent. They are working so hard to correct this misunderstanding. They think, consciously or not, why is this affecting them so much? What are they afraid of? Why do they care this badly what I think? This is the trap. This is the invisible architecture of the power dynamic that most people walk straight into without ever realizing it exists. The accusation is not the attack. The attack is the invitation to defend. Because the moment you accept that invitation, you have handed your accuser something priceless. You have handed them the frame. You have stepped into their reality, accepted their terms, and agreed to play by their rules. And no matter how good your argument is, no matter how airtight your logic is, you are now operating on their territory. You are a visitor in a world they constructed. And visitors rarely win. Smart people understand this. not all of them consciously, and not all of them immediately. But somewhere along the way, either through failure or observation, or just a gut feeling they learned to trust, they stopped reacting and started watching. And what they saw changed everything. They saw that the people who stayed calm during an accusation almost always looked more credible than the people who fought back. They saw that silence, real silence, the kind that is calm and deliberate rather than shocked or passive, created a psychological pressure that turned inward on the attacker in ways that no argument ever could. They saw that the most dangerous thing you could do when someone tries to destabilize you is to simply refuse to be destabilized, not fake it, not perform composure while panicking on the inside. Actually embody it, because you understand something the attacker doesn't, that their words only have the power you give them. And they learnt something else, something that takes longer to understand, but is perhaps the most important insight of all. They learned that most accusations are not really about them. Think about the last time someone attacked your character or your choices or your intelligence in a social setting. Think about what was actually going on. In almost every case, not all, but almost, the attack was coming from a place of something unresolved in the attacker. Insecurity, jealousy, fear, the need to elevate themselves by pulling you down, the need to feel power in a moment where they feel powerless. Your success reminded them of their stagnation. Your confidence made their self-doubt louder. Your presence in the room shifted something in the hierarchy, and they responded to the discomfort of that shift by trying to diminish you. When you understand this, the whole equation changes, because now the accusation is no longer about you and your guilt or innocence. It is about them and their internal state. And you cannot lose a verdict that is not actually being rendered about you. You can only play into it, amplify it, make it real by responding as though it matters. Smart people learn to see the accusation for what it is, a reveal of the attacker's interior life dressed up in language about you. And instead of walking into that courtroom and pleading their case, they simply watch the reveal happen. They let the light fall on the attacker's insecurity, and they stay out of the shadow it casts. But here is where it gets more nuanced, because simply staying quiet is not the whole picture. Silence is a tool, a powerful one, but it is not magic and it is not the only move. What makes smart people genuinely different is not that they never speak. It is that everything they choose to say or not say is chosen from a position of composure rather than reaction. They have created enough internal space between stimulus and response that they can actually choose how to engage rather than being driven by the adrenaline of feeling attacked. There is a man most people have never heard of who understood this better than almost anyone who ever lived. Not a philosopher in the traditional sense. Not someone who wrote about virtue or morality or the good life. Someone who watched power operate in the real world, in courts and councils and back rooms where reputations were built and destroyed overnight, and wrote down exactly what he observed without flinching from the ugliness of it. Niccolo Machiavelli spent his life studying what actually worked in human dynamics, not what should work, not what we wish worked, but what demonstrably, repeatedly, consistently produced results. And one of the things he observed, with a clarity that still cuts through centuries of distance, is that the man who feels compelled to explain himself has already conceded something critical. He called it accepting the frame. We might call it playing their game. Whatever language you use, the principle is the same. The moment you begin to justify your actions, clarify your intentions, or protest your innocence, you have implicitly acknowledged that the other person has the authority to evaluate you. You have walked into a courtroom of their making and taken the stand. And the problem with taking the stand is that it doesn't matter how innocent you are. The very act of being on trial changes how you are perceived. People who are truly powerful, truly untouchable, do not appear before tribunals. They are not subject to the judgment of people below them, and the moment you behave as though you are, you invite the world to treat you as though you are. This sounds ruthless. It is, but it is also deeply accurate, and you have seen it play out hundreds of times without necessarily connecting the dots. Think of the leaders, the executives, the artists, the figures in your life who carried the most real authority, not the most noise, not the most aggression, but the most genuine weight? Were they the ones who rushed to correct every mischaracterization? Were they constantly in comment sections and meeting rooms explaining themselves and appealing to people's sense of fairness? Almost certainly not. The ones who carried real authority were the ones who seemed to operate from a place so far above the fray that the fray simply didn't reach them, not because nothing was ever said about them, but because they didn't treat what was said as a verdict they needed to overturn. And here is what most people miss when they observe this quality in powerful people. They assume it is arrogance. They assume it is indifference. They assume these people simply don't care what others think, as though caring is weakness and not caring is strength. That is not what is happening. The people who don't defend themselves are not indifferent to their reputation. They care deeply about how they are perceived. But they understand something crucial about the mechanics of perception that the defensive person doesn't. That reputation is not built in the moment of accusation. It is built in the long arc of consistent behavior. And that long arc is damaged far more by panicked self-defense than by a single accusation left hanging in the air. When you defend yourself frantically, you are essentially telling everyone watching that this accusation has the power to destabilize you. And if it can destabilize you, people begin to wonder why. They begin to fill in their own blanks. They begin to ask themselves questions they would never have asked if you had simply stayed composed. The psychology here is counterintuitive but ironclad. Anxiety about an accusation is more damaging to your reputation than the accusation itself, because the accusation could be wrong. Your anxiety is real. It is happening in front of them. They can see it. They cannot unsee it. Smart people, once they understand this, begin to develop a different relationship with their own discomfort. They stop trying to eliminate the discomfort of being misunderstood or mischaracterized. They stop treating that discomfort as a problem that needs to be solved through explanation. They begin to sit with it, to hold it without immediately reacting to it. And over time, something remarkable happens. The discomfort becomes information rather than instruction. It tells them something is happening without telling them what to do about it. And in that gap between information and action, they find their real power. Because here is what no one tells you about the urge to defend yourself. It is almost never about the other person. It looks like it is. It feels like it is. But the real engine driving it is your own internal need to feel okay about who you are. The accusation lands and it activates something in you, some part of you that has not fully resolved its own sense of worth, some part that is still seeking external confirmation that you are good enough, smart enough, right enough. And the defense is really just an attempt to get that confirmation from the very person attacking you, which is, if you look at it clearly, one of the most self-defeating moves available. You are going to the fire to ask for water. Smart people learn to stop seeking that confirmation from outside themselves, not perfectly and not all at once, but progressively. They develop what we might call internal authority, a settled sense of who they are that does not require constant external maintenance. And when you have that, when you are genuinely rooted in your own self-knowledge rather than dependent on the world's agreement, the accusation simply does not land with the same force. It skims the surface. You feel it, you register it, and then you watch it pass without grabbing it. This is what composure actually is. Not the absence of feeling, not a performed calmness layered over real panic, but a genuine rootedness that comes from having done the internal work of knowing yourself clearly enough that other people's characterizations of you feel like their business rather than yours. And that quality, that real composure, is absolutely visible to everyone in the room. You cannot fake it, but you also do not need to. Because when it is real, it does more work for your reputation in 30 seconds of silence than 10 minutes of explanation ever could. Now let's talk about what actually happens in the room when someone attacks you and you don't take the bait. Because the psychology of it is more interesting than most people realize, and understanding it is what separates the person who stays quiet out of fear from the person who stays quiet out of strategy. When an attack is made in a social setting, whether it's a meeting, a dinner, a conversation, an online thread. It doesn't matter. The attacker is operating on an assumption. They assume you will react. They have, consciously or unconsciously, planned for your reaction. They are ready for it. They know what they will say when you get defensive. They have their next move queued up. The entire dynamic they are creating depends on you playing your assigned role, which is the accused, the rattled, the person scrambling to recover. That is the script they have written. And the one thing they cannot account for, the one thing they have no rehearsed response to, is you simply not showing up for your role. When you go silent, genuinely, calmly, without visible distress, the script falls apart. The attacker suddenly has no one to play against. They have thrown their punch at empty space, and now they are standing there with their fist extended and nothing to show for it, and everyone in the room is watching. The silence that follows is not neutral. It has weight and direction. It presses back on the attacker in ways they were not prepared for, because now they have to decide what to do next. And that decision, made under pressure, in front of an audience that is now studying them instead of you, is where they almost always make a mistake. They repeat themselves, they get louder, they look around for backup. They add details that weren't in the original attack, which makes it look like they are building a case rather than stating a truth. And all of this, every panicked overcorrection they make, shifts the room's perception incrementally away from you and toward them. They came in as the accuser, and they are leaving as the spectacle. You came in as the accused, and you are leaving as the one who was too composed to bother engaging. And in the currency of social perception, that composure is worth more than winning any argument. There is something almost architectural about this dynamic. The person who controls their reaction controls the room, not through force, not through argument, not through being louder or smarter or more persuasive, but through the simple and devastating power of not needing to react. That needlessness, that genuine, visible, composed indifference to being attacked, communicates something to everyone watching that cannot be communicated any other way. It says, without words, that the attack did not find purchase, that you are not the person the attacker described, that you are operating from a level where this kind of thing simply does not require a response. There is a particular kind of person who has mastered this so completely that watching them operate feels almost uncanny. You have probably met one, maybe in a professional setting, maybe in a social one. They are not necessarily the most charismatic person in the room. They are not the loudest or the most visibly confident. But there is something about them that makes the air in a room feel different when they enter it. Something that makes other people slightly more careful about what they say and how they say it. Not out of fear exactly, though fear is part of it. Out of a dim awareness that this person is playing a different game than everyone else. That the normal social weapons, embarrassment, accusation, public shaming, the pointed joke, simply do not work on them the way they work on everyone else. And that awareness creates a kind of invisible boundary around them that most people instinctively do not cross. What is that quality? What is the thing they have that others don't? It is not status, though they often have status. It is not intelligence, though they are often intelligent. It is something more fundamental than either of those things. It is the complete absence of the need for your approval, not the performance of not needing it, which is actually quite easy to see through and which most people can detect immediately. The real thing. The genuine, settled, internalized freedom from the opinion of the room. And that freedom, when it is real, is one of the most commanding qualities a human being can possess. Because here is what most people do not understand about social dynamics. The entire system of social pressure, the gossip, the accusations, the public humiliations, the subtle undermining, all of it depends on one thing. It depends on you caring. The moment you genuinely stop caring, not as a performance but as a reality, the entire machinery stops working. The gears spin and find no purchase. The attack lands and produces no damage. And the person who launched it is left holding a weapon that turned out to be useless, in front of an audience that just watched it fail. That is a deeply uncomfortable position for an attacker to be in, and it is entirely of their own making. Smart people understand that the social game is fundamentally a consent game. You can only be embarrassed if you consent to being embarrassed. You can only be destabilized if you consent to being destabilized. You can only be subject to someone's judgment if you consent to standing before their court. And the withdrawal of that consent, executed cleanly and without drama, is the most powerful thing you can do in any social conflict. You are not arguing against their verdict. You are declining to recognize their jurisdiction. But let's be honest about something, because this is where a lot of people get stuck. The idea of not defending yourself sounds wonderful in theory and feels nearly impossible in practice, especially when the accusation is false, especially when people you respect are hearing it, especially when the stakes feel high and the silence feels like surrender. There is something in us that screams that staying quiet is the same as admitting guilt, that if we don't correct the record, people will believe the lie, that the world will not be fair to us if we don't fight for ourselves. And here is what smart people have learned about that feeling. It is almost always wrong. Not always. There are situations, legal ones, professional ones with formal processes, ones where documentation and official record matter, where you absolutely need to state your position clearly and defend it. Those situations are real and they are important, and in those situations, defense is not weakness, it is due diligence. But in the vast majority of social situations, in the ambient world of perception and reputation and how people feel about you in rooms, the feeling that you must defend yourself is not wisdom. It is anxiety dressed up as logic. It is the nervous system trying to protect you using a strategy that actually makes things worse, because the world does not work the way that feeling tells you it does. People do not form lasting impressions based primarily on accusations. They form lasting impressions based on patterns, on who you consistently are over time, on how you carry yourself when the pressure is on whether you seem solid or whether you seem fragile. And nothing communicates fragility faster than watching someone fall apart when their character is questioned. Conversely, nothing communicates solidity faster than watching someone remain completely unmoved by an attack that would have rattled most people. That image of a person who cannot be rattled sticks in the mind far longer than any argument or explanation ever could. This is what smart people are building when they choose not to defend themselves. They are not conceding the point. They are not agreeing with their accuser. They are constructing, one composed reaction at a time, a reputation for being the kind of person who does not need to fight for their own credibility because their credibility is already self-evident. They are making a long-term investment in how they are perceived at the cost of a short-term discomfort, and that trade, over time, pays out in ways that no argument ever could. Think about the people in history who were most viciously attacked and who chose not to respond in kind. Not passively, not helplessly, but deliberately. Think about the leaders and thinkers and creators who were accused of everything imaginable and who simply continued doing what they were doing, continuing to produce, continuing to show up, continuing to be exactly who they were without adjusting themselves to fit the accusation. In almost every case, the attack faded. The accuser was eventually forgotten or discredited, and the person who had been attacked stood taller for having weathered it without breaking, because the willingness to be misunderstood without collapsing under the weight of it is one of the clearest demonstrations of character that exists. Now here is something else that rarely gets said in conversations like this, because it is slightly uncomfortable, but it is also completely true. The people who attack you most viciously are almost always showing you exactly what they are most insecure about in themselves. This is not a therapeutic cliché. It is a precise observation about how human psychology works. We project. We externalize. The things that bother us most in others are almost always the things we have not resolved in ourselves. The person who accuses you of arrogance is almost always the person who struggles most with feeling small. The person who calls you manipulative is almost always the person who feels most manipulated by their own circumstances. The person who questions your intelligence is almost always the person who carries the deepest fears about their own. When smart people understand this, they stop taking attacks personally in the way most people take them personally. They start to see the attack as a kind of autobiography, a compressed, unintentional confession from the attacker about what is happening inside them. And you cannot be devastated by someone's confession, you can feel compassion for it. You can note it with interest. You can use the information it gives you about who this person is and what they are struggling with, but it does not threaten you, because it was never really about you. This reframe is not about being soft or charitable or spiritually evolved, though it might produce those things as side effects. It is about something more practical. It is about removing yourself from the equation, about recognizing that you are not the subject of the attack in any meaningful sense. You are the screen onto which something is being projected, and a screen does not argue with what is projected onto it. It just remains where it is, and when the projection stops, it is clean again. The people who cannot do this, the ones who take every accusation as a referendum on their actual worth, are the ones who exhaust themselves fighting battles that were never about them. They win some, and they lose some, and they never quite feel secure, because the next attack is always coming, and they have never built anything internal enough to protect them from it. They depend entirely on external validation to feel okay, which means they are always one accusation away from crisis. And in a world where accusations are cheap and plentiful, that is an extraordinarily fragile way to live. Smart people build something else. They build an interior, a private, settled sense of self that does not expand or contract based on what the room thinks of them today. Not because they are detached from the world or indifferent to it, but because they have done the work of knowing themselves clearly enough that external characterizations simply cannot overwrite what they know to be true. And from that interior, they operate with a freedom that most people never experience. The freedom to stay quiet when staying quiet is the most powerful thing they can do. The freedom to let the accusation exist without treating it as an emergency. The freedom to watch the whole dynamic play out with enough distance to see it clearly rather than being swallowed by it. That freedom is not given to you. It is built, slowly, through repeated choices, through sitting with the discomfort of being misunderstood without immediately trying to fix it, through learning over and over again that you survived the silence and that the silence served you better than the defense would have. It is built through watching what happens when you do not take the bait, through seeing the attacker self-destruct, through noticing how the room shifts when you stay composed, and through absorbing, gradually and permanently, the lesson that your composure is your most powerful statement. And eventually, if you do this enough times, something shifts. The reflex changes. Instead of the automatic spike of anxiety when you feel attacked, you feel something different. A kind of stillness, a settling, an almost curious observation of what is happening from a slight remove, as though you are watching a weather system move through rather than being caught in the rain. And from that place, you can choose. You can choose to say something or nothing. You can choose to deflect or redirect or simply let the moment pass. But you are choosing from composure rather than reacting from panic. And that, more than any specific tactic or technique, is what separates the people who consistently come out of conflict intact from the ones who consistently come out of it diminished.